Take me to jail. In prison, dinner was always a big thing. We had a pasta course, and then we had a meat or a fish. Paulie did the prep work. He was doing a year for contempt, and he had this wonderful system for doing the garlic. He used a razor, and he used to slice it so thin that it used to liquefy in the pan with just a little oil. It's a very good system. Vinny was in charge of the tomato sauce.
Ah, got the smoke. Got three kinds of meat in the meatballs. You got veal, beef, and pork.
Ah, good, but you gotta have the pork.
Oh, that's the flavor.
I felt he used too many onions, but it was still a very good sauce.
Vinny, don't put too many onions in the sauce.
I didn't put too much onions. Paul. 3 small onions, that's all I did.
Hi there. I hope you enjoyed the clip. That was from 1990 movie Goodfellas, where Henry is describing dinner in prison. And of course, the main course is a pasta dish. We all know pasta, and we all love pasta. But how did a traditional Italian dish end up on the tables of millions of people all across the globe? Well, I'm about to take you on a journey to explore the story of pasta. So the story goes. According to his fabled visits to China, Marco Polo, the great Venetian explorer and merchant, is said to have brought back with him noodles, which then became the pasta that Italy is famed for today. To be more specific, the legend is that he brought back macaroni, which nowadays is a generic term for dried alimentary pasta made from hard wheat. Marco Polo travelled to China in around 1271 and returned in around 1292. After his travels, he became a prisoner of war in Genoa, where he wrote a book called Description of the World, which we know today as The Travels of Marco Polo. In the book, he mentions noodles, and some have used this as evidence that he brought back with him from China, having discovered this new kind of food there. But in fact, the actual passages seem to suggest that he was already well familiar with this kind of food, and he was describing the Chinese noodles based off the pasta he already knew from home. Also, earlier mentions of pasta come from 1154, when an Arabian traveller, al-Idrisi, visited Sicily, and he described, I quote, food made from flour in the form of strings. And that was well before Marco Polo's travels in 1271. The Spaghetti Museum in Ponte d'Asio in Imperia houses several documents from 1279 and 1284, which refer to pasta, macaroni, and vermicelli. There is simply no truth at all to the legend that Marco Polo brought noodles back from China. Pasta in literature. Pasta's popularity is mentioned by the 14th century writer Giovanni Boccaccio. In his collection of novellas, The Camron, he wrote, and I quote, "And that there was a mountain all of grated Parmesan cheese, whereon abode folk who did nothing but make macaroni and ravioli, and cook them in capon broth, after which they threw them down thence." In the 1390s, Franco Sacchetti, a writer of tales and poems, tells us how two friends meet up to eat macaroni. They both eat from the same dish, as it was the custom of the time, but one of them has more of an appetite than the other. And I quote, "Nodo started to pile the macaroni together, roll it up, and swallow it down. He had sent 6 mouthfuls down the hatch, while Giovanni's first one was still on the fork. He did not dare to put it in his mouth, as the food was steaming. The city of Naples and the surrounding region, including Sicily, saw a surge in the production of pasta in the 17th and 18th centuries. On a visit to the Kingdom of Naples in 1787, the German poet Goethe, excuse my pronunciation, witnessed the pasta boom firsthand, and the painting there is of Goethe in his when he visited the Roman Campania region, and I quote, "It can be bought anywhere and in all the shops for very little money. As a rule, it is simply cooked in water and seasoned with grated cheese." And one day, he was visiting Agrigento, a town in Sicily, with some friends. And they stayed in the home of a family who gave them a dish of macaroni, whose shape, texture, and colour fascinated the German writer. And as they sat at the table, the host explained that this type of pasta was made only from the highest quality hard wheat, and then formed by hand into a spiral shape like a shell. And he wrote, "This macaroni they served us was exquisite. The pasta seemed unparalleled to me in its whiteness and fineness." A very different ancestor. So in an Italian-English lexicon from 1611, macaroni is defined as a kind of meat dish made of round pieces of paste, boiled in water, and put into a dish with butter, spice, and grated cheese upon them. The combination of pasta with meat stock and cheese and sugar in the recipe will definitely raise many modern eyebrows. But was this meant to be served as a savoury or a sweet dish? Bartolomeo Scappi, born 1500 and till 1570, was a Renaissance Italian author and cook. During his prized career, he cooked for 6 popes, and in fact was working at the Vatican at the same time as Michelangelo was working on the Sistine Chapel. In the menus that Scappi added to his cookbook, soups and pasta dishes were mainly mentioned as a part of the second course. In a very rich menu that was mentioned for the second coronation of Pope Pius V, which was sadly not served because the Pope did not approve such abundances, Roman macaroni was to be served during the second course with 29 other dishes. And no meat was to be served because January 17th, 1566 was a Friday, so a fish day. So therefore, the macaroni on the menu would have not been boiled in meat stock, but in milk. So, how was it made? I'm going to play a clip of a chef recreating Scappi's dish while I run through the recipe. Scappi's recipe for macaroni alla Romanesca was quite elaborate. Flour and breadcrumb dough was mixed with goat's milk and egg yolk, then flattened into a sheet. It was then cut into thin strips with a roller cutter, a bozzolo. After being left to dry, the macaroni was boiled for half an hour, strained, uncovered with grated cheese, slices of butter, sugar, cinnamon, and pieces of provatura, a Roman variant of mozzarella cheese. Finally, the dish was baked in the oven for half an hour with a little rose water, so the cheese would melt while the macaroni would be imbued with the flavours of the spices. It is no surprise that 16th century author Giulio Cesare Croce put macaroni on his list of fattening dishes. The enormous amount of sugar that was used in preparing the menu was certainly very bad for one's health. However, sugar began its career in the Middle Ages as a medicinal spice. Therefore, it was believed that the addition of sugar and cinnamon would make the dish healthier. During the 16th century, sugar became a stimulant that was enjoyed for its taste and was used excessively. Pomodoro. You might have wondered, why hasn't he mentioned tomato sauce? Well, surprisingly, tomatoes are newcomers to Italian cuisine. They were new ingredients that made their way to Europe after the discovery of America. So, not surprisingly, the first mention of pasta with tomato sauce in Italy, sort of nouvelle cuisine for the times, was in 1790. By the 1830s, tourists and travellers began to report finding traditional dishes regularly topped with tomatoes and with tomato sauce. Ippolito Cavalcanti, the Neapolitan author of La Cucina Teorico-Pratica, excuse my pronunciation, a very popular cookbook published in 1837, included the recipe for vermicelli pasta al pomodoro. Relatively soon, in 1847, macaroni alla napoletana, the combination of pasta and tomatoes, arrived in the United States. By the 1880s, tomatoes had been established as the condiment of choice for pasta for the peasants of the Campania region, and pasta itself had become a staple. Now, there was a reason for the pasta boom in Naples. The deterioration in the common people's standard of living, which significantly limited their access to meat, while the large landowners in the Kingdom of Naples or Sicily sold wheat relatively cheaply. Religious restrictions also had an influence on the changing diet. Pasta was an ideal food for days when eating meat was forbidden. But perhaps the main reason for pasta's dramatic spread was that from the 17th century, industrial pasta production was developed with the use of machines such as the torchio, which was a mechanical press to make noodles or vermicelli, so seen on the diagram on the left. So, in Naples, pasta became identified with beggars or lazzaroni, but that did not prevent pasta from conquering the palates of the upper classes. King Ferdinand IV of Naples, for an example, devoured macaroni with gusto, and an account says, and I quote, "He picked them up with his fingers, twisting and pulling them, and voraciously stuffed them in his mouth, spurning the use of a knife, fork, or spoon." Global expansion part 1. So a fun fact is that pasta was actually introduced to the United States by Thomas Jefferson when he served as minister to France from 1785 to 1789. He was introduced to pasta during a trip to Naples, and when he returned to the US, he brought back crates of macaroni and a pasta making machine. At first, only upper-class Americans purchased pasta, but once factories sprouted up, the cost of pasta became affordable. So by the time of the Civil War, which was 1861 to 1865, even the working class could afford a pasta dinner. But pasta only became the successful dish it is today thanks to the huge wave of Italian immigration to the US at the end of the 19th century. From 1880 to 1921, more than 5 million Italian immigrants came to America. Global Expansion Part 2. The form of curie, a Middle French title for the method of cooking, was originally a scroll containing 200 recipes written in around 1390 by the master cooks of King Richard II. A familiar lasagna and macaroni and cheese can be found in this very cooking method. But due to the complicated processes involved in making the pasta and the skills required to cook a pasta dish, it is highly likely that macaroni and cheese would have been an upper class dish. So I have the two recipes from the form of curie, and macros is actually the sort of Middle French term for macaroni, and this was a translation, and I will read it out. And it says, take and make a thin foil of dough, and carve it in pieces, and cast them on boiling water, and seethe it well. Take cheese and grate it, and butter cast beneath and above, as with lozenges, and serve forth. And I think lozenges were lasagna. I think it's another sort of middle sort of French or Middle English term. And I will read out the translation of the recipe. It says, take good broth and put it in an earthenware pot. Take fine white flour and make with it a paste with water. And make from that foils as thin as paper with a roller. Dry them hard and seethe them in the broth. Take grated soft cheese and lay it in dishes with spice powder, and lay over it the pasta layers, as many and as thick as you wish, and above powder and cheese, and so 2 or 3 times, and serve it forth. Later on, it was quite common on Victorian menus. The bestseller Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, which was published in 1861, also had a macaroni and cheese recipe. But by then it was certainly a middle-class dish. However, it was not until the Second World War that pasta and other foods cooked in an Italian style became fashionable. In Elizabeth David's Italian Food, published in 1954, advised the readers on where to obtain such rare items such as olive oil and Parmesan cheese. So our journey ends here. Pasta from its humble beginnings, now a global food giant. I hope you've learnt a few things about pasta and its origins, and continue your love for pasta. Sadly, I cannot take any questions, but by any means, do send me an email if you really have any burning questions, but I assume that Google might be the best place to go to. Thank you very much, and ciao.